Two police officers spotted a little girl at the corner of the street. When she started talking, they were horrified by what was revealed. Officer Bryant drove his patrol car through the quiet streets of St. Paul, Minnesota. It was the kind of morning where the city seemed to breathe in unison, the usual hum of traffic replaced by the whisper of wind against the buildings. Bryant had been on this route countless times, his eyes tracing the familiar paths, alleys, and corners. Today was supposed to be no different. He turned onto a narrow street, lined with brick buildings that loomed in silence. His gaze caught a flicker of movement in a shadowy corner. He slowed the car, peering through the windshield. There, barely visible against the darkened backdrop, was a small figure huddled close to the wall. Bryant's eyes narrowed as he parked the car and stepped out, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He approached cautiously, the figure becoming clearer with each step. It was a young girl. Her clothes hung off her frame in dirty rags, patches of skin peeked through where the fabric had torn. Bruises marked her pale arms, and her hair clung to her face in matted clumps. But it was her eyes that struck him the most, wide, dark, and filled with an unmistakable fear. They darted around as if searching for an escape, glancing at Bryant with a mixture of wariness and desperation. Bryant stopped a few feet away, lowering himself to a crouch to meet her at eye level. He knew better than to rush. He had seen this kind of fear before. In his line of work, one wrong move could send someone running, or, worse, shut them down completely. "Hey there," he began softly, keeping his tone gentle. "I'm Bryant. I'm here to help, okay? You're safe now." The girl didn't respond. She just stared at him, her body trembling slightly, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. He could see her breathing quicken, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Bryant felt a knot form in his stomach. She looked as if she hadn't eaten or slept properly in days. He glanced back at his patrol car, then slowly stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. "Stay right here," he said, holding up a hand in a gesture of reassurance. "I'll be right back. I'm not going far." He walked back to the car, keeping one eye on her. Opening the door, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small packet, a granola bar. It wasn't much, but it was all he had at the moment. He returned to the girl, again kneeling down to her level. "Here," he said, extending the bar toward her. "It's just something to eat. You must be hungry." She hesitated, her eyes flicking between the granola bar and Bryant's face. Her small, thin hands moved slowly, trembling as she reached out and took it. For a moment she held it close to her chest, as if unsure whether to trust this gesture. Then, almost cautiously, she began to unwrap it. Bryant watched as she took a small bite, chewing slowly, her eyes never leaving his. He felt a slight sense of relief. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently. The girl didn't answer, but she didn't look away this time either. She continued to eat in silence, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. Hunger, fear, and something else Bryant couldn't quite place. It was as if she was calculating the risk, weighing her options. "All right," he said, not pressing further. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. We'll take this slow. But I promise you, I'm here to help. No one's going to hurt you while I'm around." She continued to nibble on the granola bar, her eyes fixed on him, still guarded yet slightly softer than before. Bryant stayed there, crouched down, meeting her gaze with a steady calmness. He knew that in situations like this, words meant little. It was the actions that counted, the patience, the willingness to wait until she was ready. Officer Ana Castillo arrived swiftly, her face set in a mask of determination. Bryant greeted her with a brief nod. They both turned their attention to the girl, who now sat in the back seat of Bryant's patrol car, clutching the remnants of the granola bar. She looked up as Anna approached, her eyes wide with the same blend of fear and mistrust that Bryant had seen earlier. "Has she said anything?" Anna asked quietly. Bryant shook his head. "Not a word. Won't even tell us her name." Anna crouched down, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hi, sweetheart. My name is Anna. We're just here to help you, okay?" Her voice was soft, but the girl turned her head away, pressing herself further into the corner of the seat. Anna murmured, straightening up. She exchanged a look with Bryant, one that spoke volumes. This wasn't going to be easy. They decided on a different approach. With the girl safely in the car, Bryant and Anna began canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on doors, their badges held out in clear view. One by one, the residents opened their doors only a crack, their eyes darting nervously at the sight of the officers. "We're looking for information about a little girl we found nearby," Anna started each time. "Do you know anything about her?" But the response was always the same. Shifty glances, excuses, and a quick shake of the head. "No, officer, I don't know anything." "Haven't seen any girl around here?" Some didn't even bother with words. They just closed the door in the officers' faces, leaving Bryant and Anna standing on the stoop, staring at the peeling paint of yet another shut door. Bryant felt a knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't the usual indifference he was used to. This was fear, an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. "They're scared of something," he muttered to Anna after the fifth door had slammed shut. Anna nodded, her expression grim. "The question is, what? Or who?" Bryant and Anna were starting to feel the weight of dead ends piling up. The silence from the residents had been unnerving, each door that closed in their faces a further lock on the mystery surrounding the little girl. Clara remained silent, her gaze often lost in some dark corner of her mind. It was as if the entire street had conspired to keep its secrets buried. They had just stepped away from another uncooperative doorstep when Anna spotted a figure bent over a small garden patch a few houses down. An elderly woman, her back slightly hunched, was pruning a rosebush, her movements slow but sure. Unlike the others, she seemed unfazed by the police presence. As they approached, she glanced up and gave them a polite nod. "Good morning, ma'am," Bryant greeted her. "I'm Officer Bryant, and this is Officer Castillo. We're trying to gather some information about a young girl we've found." The old woman wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes shifting to Clara. "I've seen her before," she said plainly, her voice steady and clear, unlike the whispers and hurried words they had encountered so far. "She's been around here for about a week." Bryant and Anna exchanged a look of surprise. "You've seen her? When?" Anna pressed, keeping her tone calm, almost conversational. The woman nodded, turning back to her garden. "Mostly at dusk, sometimes later. She'd wander through here, always keeping to the shadows. I thought she was hiding from something. Or someone." Clara stiffened at these words, her gaze dropping to the ground. Anna noticed the subtle shift in the girl's posture and moved a step closer, ready to offer some comfort if needed. The woman continued, her focus still on her flowers. "A few nights ago I noticed some men lurking around," she said, her voice taking on a colder edge. "They weren't from around here. They kept to the alleys and whispered to each other. I overheard them talking about a shipment and a lost item. They mentioned a name, Clara." Bryant felt a chill run down his spine. "Clara," he repeated. "They were looking for her?" The old woman finally turned to face them fully. Her eyes were sharp, piercing in a way that made Anna realize this woman had seen much in her life. "Yes," she confirmed. "They called her a piece of merchandise, said they needed to retrieve her quickly before it became an issue. I knew then that this wasn't just some runaway child. There's something more going on." Clara's face had gone pale, her small body trembling despite the warmth of the sun. Bryant knelt beside her, trying to catch her eyes, but she refused to meet his gaze. Instead, she stared at the ground, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. "What did they look like?" Anna asked, trying to keep the urgency out of her voice. The old woman pursed her lips, thinking. "I couldn't see them clearly. They kept to the shadows. But there was something off about them, like they were used to not being seen. I didn't catch much, just that they were searching for Clara. And they seemed desperate, as if losing her meant more than just a lost child." Bryant stood, his mind racing. Clara wasn't just a girl who had lost her way, she was running from something far darker. He looked at Anna, seeing the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his gut. This was no ordinary case. "Thank you, Ma'am," Anna said, her voice tight. "You've been very helpful." The woman nodded and returned to her roses, her pruning shears snipping away with precise clicks. As if on cue, Clara finally looked up. Her eyes, which had been hollow and distant, were now wide with fear. It was as if the woman's words had pulled a cord within her, unearthing a memory that she had fought hard to bury. "Clara," Bryant said softly, "is there something you want to tell us? Anything at all?" Clara shook her head violently, taking a step back, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Anna moved to intercept, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything now, but we need you to trust us." The girl's gaze flickered to the old woman, who continued her gardening as if oblivious to the world around her. Then Clara looked back at Bryant and Anna, her eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. She seemed to be balancing on the edge of a precipice, torn between the safety of silence and the terror of revealing whatever truth she carried. Bryant sighed inwardly. They were still in the dark, but now they had a thread to follow. It wasn't much, but it was something. A name, a shadowy description, and a sense of dread that loomed over the quiet street. The bar sat at the edge of the city's underbelly, a dimly lit establishment that catered to the shadows of society. Its reputation preceded it, a place where criminals whispered and secrets traded hands over half-empty glasses. Bryant and Anna knew stepping into this world would mean crossing into murky waters, but they were out of leads, and Clara's time was running out. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the scent of spilled liquor. The patrons gave the two officers a passing glance before returning to their private conversations. No one wanted to draw unnecessary attention, not in a place like this. Bryant moved forward with a purposeful stride, Anna close behind him, scanning the room until they spotted their target. At a secluded booth in the far corner sat a man known only as the Whisperer. Thin, with an almost skeletal frame, he had a face that melted into the shadows. He thrived on information, a dealer in knowledge who had his fingers in every dark corner of the city. As Bryant and Anna approached, he looked up, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Officers," he drawled, his voice low and serpentine. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Bryant slid into the booth across from him, Anna remaining standing, her eyes never leaving the Whisperer's gaunt face. "We're looking for information," Bryant stated bluntly. "About a girl." The Whisperer leaned back, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. So many girls in this city, he murmured, tapping a long finger against his chin. What makes this one so special? Her name is Clara, Anna cut in, her tone cold. She was found wandering the streets, terrified. We have reason to believe she's being hunted. A flicker of recognition crossed the whisperer's eyes. It was brief, but it was there, and it told them they were on the right track. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. Clara, you say? Yes, I've heard whispers about a girl by that name. He paused, as if considering how much to reveal. They say she was supposed to be transported, but she vanished, causing quite a stir among some very unsavory characters. Bryant exchanged a glance with Anna. Transported where? He pressed. The whisperer shrugged. Ridgewood Heights, an exclusive neighborhood, as I'm sure you know. It seems it's not just wealth that moves through those gates. There have been shipments late at night, the kind that arrive and disappear without a trace. Anna's eyes narrowed. Shipments? Are you saying there's a trafficking ring operating out of Ridgewood Heights? The whisperer raised a hand. I'm merely repeating what I've heard. There are stories of children taken there, but no one ever sees them again. Only the occasional trace left behind, like discarded clothing, remnants of their presence. I've heard the name Richard Ramos tossed around. He's a man who enjoys his luxuries and, some say, his secrets. Bryant felt a chill creep up his spine. Richard Ramos was a name that carried weight in the city, a businessman with a pristine public image. If he was involved, this went far deeper than they had imagined. Why tell us this? Bryant asked, his voice cautious. What's in it for you? The whisperer smiled, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. Information is my currency, officer. Today I give you this freely. Tomorrow, who knows? Perhaps you'll find something worth trading. Anna shifted, her unease palpable. They were dealing with a man who thrived on manipulation, but he had given them a lead, a disturbing one, but a lead nonetheless. We're done here, she said, her tone final. Bryant stood, his eyes locking with the whisperer's one last time. If you're playing us, I'll make sure you regret it. The whisperer merely chuckled. Oh, officer, I'm not the one playing. I'm merely the one who watches the game unfold. They left the bar, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. Outside, Clara stood by the car, her small form tense, eyes wide as she glanced at Bryant and Anna. She had not heard the specifics of their conversation, but the look on their faces told her enough. There was something sinister at play. Bryant approached her slowly. Clara, he said gently, do you know a place called Ridgewood Heights? She flinched, her eyes going wide. For a moment, Bryant thought she might speak, that the dam would finally break. But then she simply nodded, her gaze turning away, locking onto a point in the distance. Anna watched the girl carefully, the lines of worry deepening on her face. Clara's silence was no longer just an act of fear. It was a fortress built around a truth too horrifying to face. She's been there, Anna said quietly, and she knows what we might find. Bryant nodded grimly. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was far darker than they had anticipated. They had to go to Ridgewood Heights, and they had to go soon. Back at the precinct, the air in the office was thick with tension. Bryant and Anna sat at a cluttered desk, the overhead light casting harsh shadows over a spread of papers and photographs. The information from the whisperer had left them both uneasy, each of them grappling with the gravity of what they had learned. Ridgewood Heights, Richard Ramos, the shipments, none of it boded well. Anna shuffled through the stack of documents, her fingers finally landing on a photograph that made her pause. Bryant, "Take a look at this," she said, sliding the photo across the desk. Bryant leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he examined the image. It was a shot of a grand, imposing mansion, sprawling lawns meticulously maintained, and high iron gates that seemed to keep the outside world at bay. "Richard Ramos's estate," he muttered. "Right there in Ridgewood Heights." There was something off about the house. The photo, taken in the dim light of dusk, gave the mansion an eerie aura, as if it was hiding secrets behind its perfectly maintained facade. They studied it in silence, the atmosphere growing heavier by the second. Just then, Clara wandered into the room, drawn by the low hum of conversation. She paused by the doorway, her eyes falling on the photograph sprawled across the desk. For a moment, everything stilled. Then, as if an unseen force had struck her, Clara's eyes widened in horror. Bryant noticed it first, the way her face drained of color. "Clara?" he called gently, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were glued to the image, her small frame beginning to tremble. Anna moved towards her, concern creasing her brow. "Clara, what is it?" she asked, her voice calm, yet edged with urgency. Clara's breath quickened. Her feet stumbled backward, as if the photograph itself was a threat. She lifted a hand to her mouth, her eyes locked on the mansion's image, her gaze wild and panicked. Bryant stood, his movements slow and deliberate. He needed to break through this barrier of fear, but gently. "Clara," he said softly, stepping in front of her line of sight to the photo. "Do you know this place?" Clara shook her head at first, but her eyes betrayed her. They flickered with recognition, with terror. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. It was as if words had become thorns lodged in her throat. Anna crouched down beside her, trying to make eye contact. "You're safe here," she assured. "Whatever it is, we can help, but we need to know." Clara closed her eyes, her breathing shallow and erratic. For a second, Bryant feared she might collapse under the weight of whatever memory had surfaced. Then she whispered something, a barely audible murmur that made both officers lean in. "Bad place," she managed to utter, her voice cracked, splintering into the room like glass. "Bad things." Bryant exchanged a glance with Anna. It was enough to confirm what they had suspected, but hoped wasn't true. This mansion wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of something much darker, something that had left an indelible scar on this child. Anna reached out, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "We believe you," she said, her voice steady. "We'll find out what happened there." Clara's eyes opened, tears welling up, but refusing to fall. She glanced at the photograph again, then back at Bryant. "They took them." "There," she whispered, each word sounding like it had been dragged out of her soul. Bryant felt a chill settle into his bones. They had to act, and they had to act fast. "We need to go there," he said, the decision falling into place like the final piece of a grim puzzle. "We need to see this place for ourselves." Anna nodded. "But we can't take Clara inside. We don't know what we're walking into." Bryant agreed. They would take her with them, but she would stay outside the gates, far away from the mansion's reach. He turned to Clara, meeting her frightened gaze with as much reassurance as he could muster. "We'll go," he said, "but you don't have to go inside. You'll be safe with us." Clara hesitated, then nodded slightly, her fear still palpable but edged with a fragile trust in them. Bryant looked at the photograph one last time. It was no longer just an image of a house. It was a doorway to the truth they were seeking, and whatever awaited them on the other side, they would face it head on. The road leading into Ridgewood Heights was long and winding, lined with towering trees that cast shadows over the pavement. As they drove deeper into the neighborhood, Clara grew increasingly uneasy. She sat in the back seat, her small hands gripping the edges of the seat so tightly her knuckles turned white. Bryant glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noticing the way her eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape. "We're almost there," Anna said quietly, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Clara didn't respond, but the tension in her body spoke volumes. Every mile they covered brought them closer to whatever horror she had endured in this place. The mansion appeared suddenly, looming at the end of the driveway like a sentinel. Its grand facade was impressive, with manicured lawns and towering gates that seemed to keep the world at bay. To an outsider, it would appear as nothing more than the home of a wealthy businessman. But Bryant and Anna knew better. They parked the car near the entrance. Clara remained inside, her eyes wide, face pale. She didn't need to say a word. Her terror was palpable. Bryant turned to her, his voice gentle. "You stay here, all right? We won't be long." Clara nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the mansion. Bryant and Anna exchanged a look. They were walking into uncertain territory, but there was no turning back now. The front door opened before they even had a chance to knock. Richard Ramos stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow over the steps. He was dressed impeccably, his expression one of polite curiosity. But his eyes held a glint of something sharp and calculating. "Officers," he greeted them with a practiced smile, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Bryant kept his voice even. "Mr. Ramos, we're investigating a situation involving a young girl. We have reason to believe she may have been brought to this area recently." Ramos's smile didn't falter. "A young girl, you say? I'm afraid I wouldn't know anything about that. Children aren't exactly common guests in my home." Anna stepped forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Her name is Clara. We found her not far from here, in a state of distress." Ramos's gaze shifted ever so slightly to the car parked at the edge of the driveway. Clara, though hidden behind the tinted glass, seemed to sense his attention. She shrank further into the seat, eyes wide, her breath fogging the window. For a split second, Ramos's eyes hardened, a flicker of something cold and dangerous crossing his features before he masked it with another smile. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly. "I truly wish I could help, but as I said, I haven't seen any children around here. Perhaps you're mistaken." Bryant held his gaze. "We have information suggesting otherwise, Mr. Ramos. It would be in your best interest to cooperate." The air between them grew taut. Ramos's demeanor remained composed, but there was an undercurrent of tension now, a silent battle of wills. He stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "By all means," he said, his voice dripping with feigned hospitality. "Come in. Feel free to look around. I have nothing to hide." They entered the mansion, the interior as lavish as the exterior suggested. It was a display of wealth and power, designed to impress and intimidate. Ramos led them through the halls, his movements calm, each step measured. Yet, as they walked, Bryant noticed how Ramos's eyes kept flicking back to Clara's location, even though she was not with them. It was as if he was gauging her reaction, reading her fear, like a predator would. "You have a lovely home," Anna remarked, her tone casual, probing. "Quite secluded out here." "Privacy is a luxury," Ramos replied smoothly. "I value it highly, as do my guests." They reached a sitting room, where Ramos finally stopped and turned to face them. "Now," he said, his eyes sharp, "you've had a look. Does this satisfy your curiosity?" Bryant didn't take the bait. We're interested in more than just a tour, Mr. Ramos. We need to know why this girl is terrified of this place. Ramos's smile froze. Terrified, you say? He tilted his head slightly, a mockery of concern. That sounds unfortunate. Anna stepped closer, her gaze unyielding. She's not just scared, Mr. Ramos. She's petrified, and every piece of information we've gathered points back to you. For the briefest moment, the mask slipped. Ramos's eyes turned icy, his expression hardening before he quickly composed himself. I assure you, he said, his voice colder now, I have no involvement in whatever situation you're referring to. Outside, Clara peeked out from the car window, her eyes meeting Ramos's through the glass. In that instant, something passed between them, an unspoken recognition, a haunting memory. She shuddered and ducked down, her small body curling into a ball. Bryant caught the exchange. He knew what he saw, fear so visceral that it transcended words. We'll be back, Mr. Ramos, he said, his voice carrying a weight of a promise. Count on it. After the tense meeting with Richard Ramos, Bryant and Anna returned to the precinct with a renewed sense of purpose. Ramos's controlled demeanor and evasive answers had confirmed their suspicions. There was more to him than met the eye. They spent the next several days diving into his business records, determined to uncover the truth. Anna sat at her desk, the computer screen flickering as she scrolled through pages of financial data. He's got his hands in so many ventures, she muttered, her eyes narrowing at the maze of companies listed. Most of these are just fronts, shell companies with no real business activity. Bryant leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the screen. Look at those transactions, he pointed out, highlighting a series of payments to obscure entities. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, it's a web. He's moving money around to hide something. Hours turned into days as they pieced together the fragmented information. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Hidden among the legitimate business dealings were anomalies, large sums of money being funneled through untraceable channels, payments marked as private services, and shipments listed under vague descriptions. One name kept resurfacing in the records, a supposed logistics company that didn't exist outside of paperwork. Bryant frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. This company, he said, tapping the screen, it's a front. They're using it to move people. Anna's face hardened. That explains the shipments the whisperer mentioned, she said. Ramos isn't just laundering money. He's involved in trafficking. The evidence was circumstantial, yet damning. Clara's fear and the secrecy surrounding Ramos pointed to something far more sinister than they had initially imagined. But they needed more than financials. They needed testimony, a direct account of what had happened behind the walls of Ramos's mansion. They turned to Clara. She had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room, her gaze distant, lost in the shadows of her memories. Bryant approached her cautiously, his voice low and steady. Clara, he began, we've found some things that point to Mr. Ramos being involved in something very wrong, but we need to know more. Can you tell us about what happened in that house? Clara hesitated, her small frame tense. For a moment it seemed like she might retreat into her shell of silence, but then she glanced at Anna, who gave her an encouraging nod. Clara took a shaky breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I was there, she admitted, her eyes welling up with tears. In the basement. They kept us in cages. Anna's heart sank, and she exchanged a grim look with Bryant. They had suspected it, but hearing it from Clara brought a grim reality to their investigation. Clara continued, her voice gaining a faint trace of strength as she spoke. They watched us, she said. We weren't allowed to talk, to make noise. If we did, they would— Her voice trailed off, and she shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off the memories. Bryant felt a surge of anger. How many were there? He asked gently, trying to keep his voice steady. Clara shook her head, her eyes glazing over with the horror of it all. I don't know. So many. Some they took away, and they never came back. A heavy silence filled the room. Bryant and Anna had uncovered the darkness they had feared, a network of exploitation hiding behind the respectable facade of a businessman. Ramos's estate wasn't just a mansion. It was a place where innocence was stripped away, hidden beneath layers of wealth and influence. We have enough, Anna said, her voice tight with determination. We need to act now. Bryant nodded. We'll get a warrant, raid the mansion. We can't let him slip away. They moved quickly, contacting the district judge and laying out their evidence. The judge, visibly disturbed by what they presented, granted them the warrant. They had the legal backing they needed, but Bryant knew this was only the beginning. Ramos was powerful, connected. Bringing him down would be no easy feat. As they prepared for the operation, Clara watched them, a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. For the first time since they had found her, she seemed to believe that there might be a way out of the nightmare she had endured. Bryant knelt beside her, his expression softening. Clara, you've been incredibly brave, he said. Because of you, we're going to stop him. We're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Clara nodded, her lips trembling slightly, but there was a hint of resolve in her gaze. She wasn't just a frightened child anymore. She was a witness, a crucial piece in the puzzle that could bring down Richard Ramos and his operation. Anna joined them, her eyes meeting Bryant's. We go at dawn, she said. This ends tomorrow. Bryant took a deep breath. Yes, he agreed, glancing at Clara. It ends tomorrow. The sun had barely risen when Bryant and Anna arrived at the gates of Richard Ramos's mansion. The early morning fog clung to the ground, curling around the wrought-iron gates as if trying to hold them back. Behind them, a convoy of police vehicles waited in silence. The warrant was in Bryant's hand, the final piece that would allow them to pierce the veil of Ramos's carefully curated life. Ramos met them at the door, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his demeanor as smooth and calm as ever. He didn't flinch when Bryant presented the warrant, didn't so much as blink. Officers, he said, his voice measured. Now what? We have a warrant to search the premises, Bryant replied, his voice flat. Step aside, Mr. Ramos. Ramos hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flash of irritation crossing his eyes before he stepped back. Of course, he said, his smile tight. You're free to look around, but I assure you, you won't find anything of interest. Anna exchanged a glance with Bryant. They both knew this was a facade, that beneath this veneer of calm, Ramos was calculating his next move. They stepped inside, the officers fanning out to search the mansion. The tension in the air was palpable, each room they passed through pristine and lifeless, as if it had been staged. Clara stayed close to Bryant, her eyes wide, darting nervously around the mansion. Her small hand clutched the edge of his jacket, seeking a reassurance that the nightmare wouldn't consume her again. It was only when they reached the main hall that Clara froze, her gaze fixed on a door partially concealed behind a tapestry. She pointed, her hand trembling. Bryant followed her gaze. It was an ordinary door, nondescript, blending into the wall seamlessly. But there was something about the way Clara reacted, an instinctive terror that made his blood run cold. "What's behind that door, Mr. Ramos?" Bryant asked, his tone hardening. Ramos's face changed, his smile evaporating. For the first time, his composure slipped. "That area is private," he said curtly, stepping forward to block their path. "You have no right—" "We have every right," Anna interjected sharply. She moved toward the door, but Ramos lunged, his arm outstretched to stop her. "Stay away from there!" he barked, his voice suddenly filled with a frantic edge. The officers around them tensed, their hands moving to their holsters. Bryant didn't hesitate. "Step aside, Ramos," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Or we will make you." Ramos's eyes flicked to Clara, and for a moment a raw, unfiltered hatred gleamed in his gaze. It was enough. Bryant pushed past him, shoving Ramos aside with a force that sent him stumbling back. Anna was already at the door, wrenching it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. Ramos lunged again, his face contorted with fury, but two officers intercepted him, dragging him back as he struggled. "You don't know what you're doing!" he shouted, his voice rising in panic. "You have no idea what you're dealing with!" Bryant descended the stairs, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air grew colder, the scent of dampness and something far more unsettling filling his lungs. As they reached the bottom, the flashlight illuminated a scene that made his heart stop. Rows of cages lined the basement, each one barely large enough to hold a child. Inside, small figures huddled, their eyes wide with fear as the light washed over them. They were silent, some too weak to react, others shielding their faces from the sudden intrusion of light. Bryant felt a surge of horror and rage boil up inside him. This was beyond anything he had imagined. Anna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "There must be dozens, hundreds." They moved quickly, calling in the backup team to start the rescue. Officers moved through the basement with care, breaking open the locks, lifting the children out gently. The process was methodical, yet charged with an undercurrent of disbelief and anger. How had this horror existed in their city, behind the gates of a mansion that symbolized wealth and power? Clara stood at the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. As the first child was brought up, she let out a sob, her small body shaking violently. Bryant rushed to her, kneeling down as she collapsed into his arms, her tears soaking through his uniform. She clung to him with a desperation that spoke of release, of finally letting go of the fear that had gripped her for so long. "It's over," Bryant whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You're safe now. They're all safe." Outside, Ramos was being restrained, his face twisted in rage and defiance. He spat curses at the officers, at Bryant, at Anna. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You don't know what you're up against." Anna ignored him, her focus on the children being led out into the daylight, blinking against the brightness. Each one was a reminder of why they had fought so hard, why they had pushed through every barrier. They were not just rescuing these children, they were dismantling the empire of a man who had thrived on the darkness. Clara looked up at Bryant, her eyes swollen from crying but carrying a new light within them, a light of hope, of liberation. She had been the key to unveiling this horror, and now she could begin to heal. Bryant held her close, his heart heavy yet hopeful. The aftermath of the raid on Richard Ramos's mansion sent shockwaves through the community. The media coverage had been relentless, exposing the horrors hidden behind the gates of Ridgewood Heights. But amidst the outrage and the pursuit of justice, a quieter story unfolded, one of healing and renewal. Clara had become the face of resilience, her story once shrouded in fear, now inspired others to take action. Support poured in from all corners, donations, volunteers, and programs established to aid the rescued children. Slowly, the once broken lives began to mend. Clara was placed with a foster family, a couple who had spent years caring for children in need. They welcomed her into their home with open arms, providing the warmth and stability she had long been denied. At first, Clara moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes wary and her steps tentative. But the family was patient. They gave her space when she needed it and offered comfort when she was ready. Bryant and Anna visited often. They were a constant presence, stopping by after their shifts, checking in on her progress. Bryant would sit with her in the garden, talking about small things, flowers, the weather, anything that would make her feel connected to the world around her. Anna brought books and art supplies, encouraging Clara to express herself in any way she wanted. It was a slow process. At first, Clara remained guarded, her smiles rare and fleeting, but gradually the walls she had built around herself began to crack. She started drawing again, filling pages with pictures of a life she was beginning to imagine, a life beyond the fear and darkness. One afternoon, as Bryant was leaving the house, Clara ran up to him. She tugged at his sleeve and, for the first time, spoke without hesitation. "Can you come tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Bryant looked down at her, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Of course," he replied. "I'll be here." Weeks turned into months. Clara's laughter began to fill the house, a sound that was both fragile and strong. She played in the garden, her hair catching the light as she spun around, arms outstretched. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. She was more than what had been done to her. She was a survivor, a child finding joy in the world again. Bryant and Anna watched this transformation with a mix of pride and relief. Each visit was a reminder of why they had fought so hard. For Bryant especially, it was a relief to see the life returning to Clara's eyes. She was no longer the frightened girl they had found, huddled in the shadows. She was becoming someone new, someone whole. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Clara chase fireflies in the dusk, Bryant turned to Anna. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly. Anna nodded, her eyes following Clara's movements. "Yes," she agreed. "She is." For the first time in months, Bryant felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road had been long and fraught with darkness, but seeing Clara now, he knew they had made a difference. They had given her a chance at a future, one that was hers to shape. Clara ran back to them, her face flushed with excitement, a jar of fireflies glowing in her hands. She held it up, her smile wide and genuine. Bryant reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady and filled with hope. "It's beautiful, Clara," he said. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the world was beautiful too. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Clara's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of hope. Even in the darkest of times, we've seen her transformation from a frightened child into a beacon of resilience, proving that with support, love, and courage, a new beginning is always possible. If this story moved you, please consider showing support for those who work tirelessly to protect vulnerable children. Every effort counts, and together we can be the light in someone else's darkness. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and inspire change. Let's continue to spread awareness and make a difference, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.